Good morning and welcome to Bible Truth for Kids. Today our story is called The Raising of Lazarus from the Dead. Now last time we were together we were talking about Jesus and shepherds and sheep. Jesus said, "I'm the good shepherd." But he said something else that really upset the Pharisees. He said, "God the Father and I are one. We are one and the same." Well, that really upset them. They couldn't understand that, and it is hard to understand. But I brought these rings that I thought might help us understand what Jesus meant. He said, "God the Father and I are one and the same." He said, "I am in the Father and the Father is in me. We are one, and yet they're different. It's a mystery." The Pharisees, they didn't even want to try and understand that. They said, "You are blaspheming." Now, to blaspheme means to say something very insulting about God. And they said, "You're claiming to be God, but you're just a man." They wouldn't believe that he was the Son of God. And so not only did they want to stone him, they wanted to arrest him, but Jesus slipped away. Now today we are going to see the greatest miracle that Jesus did while he was here. He is going to raise his friend Lazarus from the dead. Now John, who wrote the Gospel of John, has already told us about 6 very miraculous signs that Jesus did, and they all point to him being the Son of God. The first one was water to wine. He turned water into wine at a wedding. And the second thing that he did was he healed an official's son from a distance. He wasn't even in the same town, and he healed him. The third thing that Jesus did, the third sign, was he healed a lame man. This man couldn't walk for 38 years. He was by the pool of Bethesda, and Jesus healed him. Then the fourth and fifth signs, they kind of go together. Jesus fed 5,000 people, and that night he walked on the water. And then he healed a man who'd been born blind. No one had ever healed a blind man until Jesus came. And today we are going to see that his friend Lazarus comes back from the dead. But you know, this isn't the first time that Jesus raised somebody from the dead. The first time he raised someone from the dead, it was a widow's son. Now, a widow is somebody whose husband had died, and she only had one son, and then he died. She lived in a little town called Nain, and the day that he died, well, you know, you had to bury someone the day that they died, and they were taking him out to be buried. And Jesus came into that town with his disciples and a great crowd with Jesus. And he saw what was happening, and he went up to her and he touched the bier. The bier is what they carried a dead person on. He touched that bier, and that man sat right up. She got her son back from the dead, and the crowd that was there was amazed. And you know, word about that spread all throughout Judea. But there had been a lot of people that hadn't seen that. And you know, when they heard that story, they said, well, you know, Jesus got there right after he died. So maybe he wasn't really dead. You know, maybe he just fainted. Or, you know, maybe he was just unconscious. Well, they weren't sure. They didn't really believe that. Well, the second person that Jesus raised from the dead was the daughter of a man called Jairus. Now, Jairus had found Jesus in a crowd, and he'd come up to him and begged him. He said, "Please come and heal my daughter. She's dying." And Jesus said that he would. But, you know, on the way there, Jesus got interrupted. And, you know, somebody from Jairus' house came out and said, "You know, you don't have to bother Jesus anymore because your daughter just died." But Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And when Jesus got to their home, he went inside into her room and he touched her hand, and she sat up. He raised her from the dead too. But you know, same thing. People said, well, she had just died, so who knows if she was really dead? Maybe she just fainted. Maybe, she's just unconscious. But today we're going to see that there's a big difference. When he raises Lazarus, there will be no doubt in their minds Lazarus was dead. Now, Mary and Martha and Lazarus all lived in a town called Bethany. And it was about 2 miles or 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. Brothers and sisters, they all 3 of them loved Jesus. They all believed that he was the Son of God, and they were good friends. Jesus was a very good friend of Lazarus, and the disciples knew them too. They'd often stop there for meals. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were very hospitable people. People were always welcome in their home. But one day Lazarus got really sick. And so Mary and Martha, they sent word to Jesus. They said, this was the message. They said, Lazarus, whom you love, is ill, very ill. But when Jesus got word, he deliberately stayed where he was for 2 days. He didn't come. He didn't, even send a message. He didn't say, don't worry, I'll be there as quickly as I can. And he didn't heal him from far away like he'd done before. Nothing. Didn't even send any word. And he delayed. And Lazarus died. He died. Why did he do that? Why didn't he come? Mary and Martha were heartbroken. He had loved Lazarus. Now, today when somebody dies, we send their body to a funeral home, and the funeral home can do some things to the body to preserve the body. Then it goes into a coffin, and then the body is buried in the ground, and we put a marker on top to tell us where that person is buried. This is called a cemetery. But in Jesus' day, there weren't any funeral homes and there weren't any cemeteries. A body had to be buried the very same day it died, because a body decays or rots very quickly. And so what you had to do was you had to wash the body first, and then you wrapped it in burial cloths. Now you might think that means that you wrapped a person up like an Egyptian mummy, really tight, but they didn't do that. When they wrapped the body, they wrapped it very loosely with cloths like this, and then in between the folds of the cloths, they put spices and ointments so that it would help keep the smell of the body down. And then they would bury just the body, not this, but they would bury the body in a cave. That's what they did. They would carve a cave out in the side of a hill, and they were big enough that you could walk inside. And they made shelves on the walls, and then you put the body on a shelf, and then you rolled the stone in front to keep out wild animals, grave robbers, and the smell. That's what you did. They buried Lazarus. Now, after Jesus had stayed there 2 days longer, he said to his disciples, let's go to Bethany. They said, what? Go to Bethany? What for? Bethany's in Judea. And you know that the Jews are just waiting to stone you. Why would we go there? Why do you want to go there? And Jesus said, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sake that I wasn't there. What did that mean? They didn't understand what Jesus meant by that. It sounded mean. But when Jesus denies us something, he always intends to give us something better. Jesus did not heal Lazarus because he was going to do something far greater. Disciples didn't know that, but God was going to get great glory out of that situation. Now, when they got near to Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. And word came to Martha that Jesus was near. Now, a lot of people had come to visit Mary and Martha, because that's what you did when somebody died. You come to their home and you visit them, and you just sit with them and comfort them and, talk to them. They wanted to talk about Lazarus and what they remembered about him and things like that. But word came to Martha, Jesus is near. So she got up and she went. Now Jesus was still far, so quite far away from Bethany, but she ran out. And she got there and she said, Lord, if you had been here, Lazarus would not have died. And Jesus said to Martha, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, well, I know that he will rise again in the last day. But Jesus didn't want Martha to think about an event. He wanted her to think about a person, himself. And he said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though he dies, will live again. Do you believe that? And Martha said, yes, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's come into the world. There is no resurrection and no eternal life apart from Jesus. Now, after Martha had said this, she ran back and she said quietly to Mary, listen, Jesus is near and he wants to see you. Now, Mary, she got up quickly. She didn't tell anybody that was sitting with her, like where she was going or what she was doing. She just got up and left quickly. And they all thought, well, she's just going back to the grave to sit there and, maybe weep for Lazarus some more. So they got up and they followed her. And when she came to Jesus, she fell down at his feet and she said the same thing that Martha had said. She said, Lord, if you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Now, Jesus was very moved in his heart, in his spirit, and he said to them, show me where you have laid him. And so they did, and when they got there, Jesus wept. And some of the people said, see how much he loved Lazarus. But other people said, well, if he could open the eyes of a man that was born blind, why couldn't he keep Lazarus from dying? Now then, Jesus said to Martha, roll away the stone. And Martha said, Lord, he's been in there for 4 days. By now, he's going to stink. And Jesus said to Martha, if you believe, you will see the glory of God. And so Martha told them to roll away the stone. If you, I had a cloth here, if you were coming across a body that had been dead for 4 days, you would have to cover your mouth and your nose. The smell would be so bad, but they rolled the stone away. There wasn't any smell. It was so quiet. And then Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth. They heard a noise like somebody shuffling. And out of the grave came Lazarus. No smell. Fully alive. He was alive. Well, can you imagine? All of the shouting and dancing and laughing that was going on now. Jesus had said, unbind him, take off those grave clothes and let him go. What a day. Many people that were there believed when they saw that happen. When they saw Lazarus come out of the grave, they said, this truly is the Son of God. But not everybody. Those guys at the back that had been critical of Jesus, they said, you know what? We need to go and tell the Pharisees what's just happened. Oh man, we need to go and tell them. And they did. They just snuck away. Jerusalem's only like 3 kilometers away. Now, when they got there and told the Pharisees what had happened, the Pharisees were dismayed. They were very troubled. Lazarus had been dead 4 days. These men had seen what had happened. They couldn't make up a rumor like he's fainted or he's unconscious or, that he wasn't really dead. He'd been really dead. There was no question. So they began to talk among themselves. What are we going to do? Everybody is going to start following Jesus. And if they do that, then the Romans are going to come in and they are going to take away our authority. They're going to take away our positions. They won't allow us to rule the people anymore. And so they decided, along with other religious leaders called the Sadducees, who they never really got along with, but on this they agreed. We have got to arrest him. We have got to kill him. But not just him. They decided they needed to kill Lazarus as well. Because if they killed Lazarus, that would put an end to all this talk. Now, Jesus, after this time, he didn't stay in Judea. So this is where Bethany is. You can see it's very close to Jerusalem, and this is Judea. He didn't stay here. He went back over here into Perea with his disciples. He didn't walk openly anymore. But you know what time of the year it is? It's the time for Passover. And many people from the country have already started coming into Jerusalem. And you know, Jesus is the talk of the town. Everybody is saying, do you think Jesus is going to come to the feast? I mean, do you think he's going to come at all? Because the Pharisees had made it very clear that if anybody knew where Jesus was, or if they had seen him, they were to report it to the Pharisees immediately, because they were going to arrest him. So next week, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, is Jesus going to go to the feast or not? And what about Lazarus? What's going to happen to him? Well, next week we'll find out, and we'll also see something very beautiful happen. But one of the disciples is going to get very upset about it. So we'll see you next time.